Now, Ireland currently has the fourth highest suicide rate in Europe, with an estimated 10 people taking their own life every week. But what exactly is the government doing to protect those with mental health problems?
Joining us now to discuss our Time to Talk campaign and the current state of the mental health services here in Ireland is Minister of State Responsibility for Mental Health. It is Kathleen Lynch. Kathleen, you're very welcome to Ireland AM this morning. Thank you for your time. Kathleen, you were here this time last year when we did our Time to Talk campaign, and we got a huge response to that. And the response we got from people was saying the services simply aren't there. So a year on, what changes have been put in place?
Well, we're continuing to recruit. We are developing, and it's almost completed, a new framework strategy in relation to suicide prevention. It will be broader, not throwing out what we had, because all of the research tells us that really what we were doing is what we should be doing. It just takes time to work, and we're beginning to see the results of that. The new framework will be published.
How are we beginning to see the results of that? Suicide rates haven't dropped.
They have, slightly. And well, they have. I mean, as the CSO figures, nothing to do with the Department of Health, nothing to do with me, nothing to do with government. And the CSO are very careful about how they collect data. They're very conscious of the fact that it needs to be very clean.
We do know there's an issue of underreporting in this country, so...
Well, you see, again, we had this discussion last year, and we're not certain about that. There are undetermined deaths, which is a difficulty for us.
So you feel genuine headway is being made when it comes to suicide?
We are making some progress. I would not say for 1 minute that we need to that we can take our eye off the ball. We can't. And I'm always reluctant to discuss absolute figures, especially when there's a reduction, because I worry that people would get a little bit complacent. But most definitely, what we are doing is beginning to have some effect. Some effect. Not enough, but some effect. And as I say, these are independently verified figures. And the other thing, of course, as well, is that, it's been spoken about more. You know, it's not always about the service that's provided. It's about attitudinal change. It's about lack of stigma, even though stigma is still a major part of mental health and where we're at.
And it's about providing services. And you mentioned recruiting there. So let's talk about recruiting. How many places were you trying to recruit for?
Well, we have recruited at this point and in place. If in relation to suicide, for instance, I'll give you very specific figures. The self-harm piece in relation to suicide is a big difficulty for us. Over 11,000 presentations, and it is, I suppose, the person within that 11,000 that presents again and again and again are the most likely to go on and die by suicide. So what we are doing is we are putting nurses into emergency departments, 16 we are putting in, and that's to the 8 emergency departments, so as that when people present, that they're not just patched up and sent home. You know, there is a follow-up, you know, there is an assessment at that point if someone needs to go in to a more acute services.
Is that just in Dublin or around the country?
Right around the country. We have scans nurses as well, which are nurses that will... when a person presents at their GP, for instance, that the GP can phone these nurses. They come, they assess the person in the surgery, and again advise on what's the more appropriate service to go. So all of that. So, you know, it's not always about the inpatient piece. It is about ensuring that people feel comfortable first and foremost when they approach whoever it is they approach, and that there is a service there, and they're not left slip through the net. Now, we'll never be entirely successful. I think we need to accept that as well. We will never, because there are people that take their own lives by suicide who would never approach either GP or the services at all, and we're never certain what all of that is about. But it's a complicated business, and we are trying to cover all of the bases. The World Health Organization invited us to their launch of their report on suicide prevention recently, because they took our research as the basis for their document. And they tell us, and I can only listen to the experts in all of this, they tell us that in relation to the suicide prevention piece that Ireland has in place at the moment, not the new strategy now, but this particular strategy, that we tick all of the boxes, and there are actions on all of these boxes, but we need to do more.
Minister, would you, do you not get incredibly frustrated? I mean, you talk there about making some headway, that there's a glimmer of light. But this is all going on, and at the same time, you had 15 million lopped off your budget. You have good jobs, and lots of them.
Yes.
You can't fill them because you haven't got the people. Now, mental health services in this country have always been the poor relation in the health services area. publicly and privately, it's been admitted. It's no secret. But if you're trying to do that and improve that in these circumstances, you're doing it with one hand, possibly two hands tied behind your back. How are you ever going to catch up? How are we ever going to catch up?
See, Mark, it wasn't always the poor relation. You know, you have to read a lot in this business, you know, to inform yourself. And in the 60s, we were spending 23% of the health budget on our mental health services.
That doesn't mean they were necessarily good services, though. Yeah.
The point I was going to make is that, and that was because we had everyone locked up. Yeah. So it is a different service. We need a different type of person, even though nurses will still be key and central to what we do. But we need a different type of person. You know, putting occupational therapists, speech and language therapists into the service was unheard of until Vision for Change. You know, so it is about a different service. It is about a different type of person working within the service. We have a difficulty with some areas of recruitment because they simply aren't there,
well,
or they simply don't.
Saying, you said yourself that even if they gave you 100 million,
yes,
it would be no use to you if you didn't have the people.
If I didn't have the people, because it's a people service.
And you can't get the people. Why can't you get the people? Are we not producing them, or are we producing them and they're going somewhere else?
Well, there are particular categories of people that we're not training enough of, and those that we are training, a lot of them are going abroad. Hopefully they'll come back with greater experience. So, you know, rather than me every year talking about I can't get psychologists, you know, I can't get clinical psychologists, I can't get counselling psychologists, and rather than saying that, what we have decided to do is change the posts that we cannot fill into, for instance, CBT. Post, which anyone can be trained in. Well, not anyone, you know, have to have a medical background. Nurses, social workers, and it's extraordinarily effective. So we do have to continuously think about how we do this differently and where there are gaps, how we fill those gaps, and ensure that when someone approaches, whomever they approach, that there is a service available. The new strategy, for instance, in relation to suicide, will have a major element of it will be about signposting people to the appropriate service.
What about, Kathleen, crisis services?
Yes.
Because we have seen to great tragic detriment in this country, families taken their lives by their own hands. I mean, awful things have happened in this country because people have reached out for crisis help and it wasn't there. So what are we doing specifically in relation to that? If it's out of hours and I'm having some sort of breakdown and I'm thinking about taking my life and perhaps those of my children, where is there somewhere I can go to now?
Well, the community mental health teams will be 24 hours. You know, there's no point, and I keep talking about sort of, you know, even the campaigns that we ran in relation to publicity. I don't know anyone, young man, young woman, who's having suicidal thoughts that sits down to watch the 9 o'clock news so they can see the ads afterwards. You know, I think we were misdirected in where we thought the audience was. So in terms of people who are suicidal, that are thinking of both damaging themselves and indeed their children, then, you know, that doesn't happen quickly. You know, that doesn't happen in a flash. That's something that is planned and in the majority of cases have already had contact with the mental health services. So it is about being aware of that. But there will always be, and we need to remind ourselves of this, there will always be people who will die by suicide even when they have had contact with the services. You know, that will happen.
But are those out-of-hours services there or not?
Out-of-hours services are there. Whether
nationwide?
Nationwide, whether it's through our ED departments with the new nurses we're putting in, who will be, by the way, senior nurses. You know, there will be senior nurses with a particular speciality. There's the whole area of the scans nurses in relation to your GP, and we know that in the majority of places in the country now you do have either South Dock, North Dock, out of hours, you know, West Dock, all of those things. So that is there. That is there. We're not there yet. I mean, you know, I don't want to give the impression here that we have a service, you know, that fits all of the criteria. We don't. But we know what we need, and we know where the gaps are and how we need to fill those gaps. So it is hugely important. But the one thing, I mean, I keep saying to people that we can talk to one another all we like, and thankfully you have a wide audience, and what you're doing all this week is extraordinarily helpful. But we have a wide audience. And really what we need to be doing is talking to the person who at this moment, right now, is thinking about taking their own life. And just basically saying to them, you know, before you take that irreversible step, just talk to someone. Talk to someone. because I think that's what happens when a tragedy like this occurs, and one person dying by suicide is a tragedy because it is a preventable death.
Kathleen, can we ask you a question about ENDA indicating tax cuts next week? ESRI saying there should be more spent on social housing. Who's right?
I think they're all right. I mean, that's our difficulty. Yeah, see, you know.
I'm sorry.
They're all right?
Yes.
But severe fence sitting, Kathleen.
No, not at all.
But it's one or the other, which is right.
I'll give you an example now. I did a bill which isn't completed yet in the Dáil about health professionals and registration.
But can I go back to this specific
and,
issue?
And 10 people contributed. 10 people contributed, and each one of them, and I took note, each one of them spoke about a different area of health, and they all said it was their priority. So, you know, everyone's priority is their priority. We need social housing. We need it urgently because we have a housing crisis, and I see now the central bank stepping in relation to mortgages to try and calm the market again, if you like. I mean, it just, you know, déjà vu is not in it when it comes to how this is going to develop.
So you would agree with the SRI?
I think the SRI have a huge point to make because people, above all else, need a roof over their heads, and we must remember that you cannot form a family if you don't have somewhere to live.
Okay,
you cannot form a family.
Thank you very much, Minister. Much appreciated.
Now we'll have lots more on R&M after the break. Please stay tuned.